money and humility. When we accumulate and use material possessions, we are to reflect Christ-like humility. Here's Gene to explain.
It's interesting that, again, James gets very specific on what some of these business people were doing. He says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit." Now, he's not condemning the fact that they were traveling around in different parts of the world in order to make money. Barnabas was one of those guys who lived in Crete, who traveled to Jerusalem. He was a real estate investor. He bought property. He was a wealthy man. That wasn't wrong that he did that. And James is not saying it's wrong to make money. It's not wrong to travel and to make money. But he says, you don't even know what tomorrow will bring. It's their attitude. You don't know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. In other words, they weren't even consulting God in relationship to their lifestyle, in relationship to what they were doing. They're saying basically, I can do this all by myself. For you are a bit of smoke. And here he really uses another metaphor to describe their riches. You are a bit of smoke that appears for a little while and then it vanishes. And then James goes on to say, here's what you ought to do as you travel to these cities, as you make investments, as you buy, as you purchase, as you make money. What you ought to say is, if the Lord wills. In other words, God has to be at the center of the process. And He was not in the center of their lives. No question about it. If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, and here he zeroes in, you boast. I can do this myself. And I have one basic motive, and that's to better myself. He says you boast in your arrogance. And all such boasting is evil. He's dealing with a very sinful attitude here. Really an attitude that leaves God out completely. So for the person who knows to do good and doesn't do it, it is a sin. In other words, I'm telling you what the will of God is. You're violating it, and if you do, you're going to continue to have real difficult problems in your life. And again, I think he's raising a question here subtly, and that is your faith alive or is it dead? You claim to have faith, but do you have faith that has given you life? Faith without works is dead, and I think he's addressing that. Now, again, Jesus was not saying it's wrong to plan ahead. In fact, he commended astute business, thinking, and planning, and thinking. What he's dealing with here, and he uses, remember the metaphor that he used earlier about these rich people? He said, the one who's rich should boast in his humiliation because he will pass away like a flower of the field. And when it's all gone, the humiliation is you have an eternal treasure. And that's what you ought to be thinking about, not in terms of this earth. So he used another metaphor, smoke that vanishes, just like the flower of the field will vanish. Now, again, let me just underscore, it wasn't the fact that they were planning that was a problem. In fact, Jesus commended astute business thinking. One illustration of that is Luke chapter 14, when he says, for which of you wanting to build a tower doesn't sit down and calculate the cost? I mean, that's good thinking, to see if he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, after he's laid the foundation, cannot finish it, all the onlookers will begin to make fun of him, saying, this man started to build and wasn't able to finish it. In other words, Jesus is using an illustration of planning, good stewardship, good thinking. He wasn't condemning that. What he was condemning was the fact that God was totally left out, and they were seeking themselves and riches rather than to build God's kingdom. So, again, back to the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus dealt with these issues, their priorities were out of whack. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. God must be first. if we're going to be in the will of God, then all these things, going to this city, going to that city, investing in this, building this tower, doing this, God will take care of that. God will help you. He'll provide for you. But you got to get your priorities straight. That's in essence what he was saying here as he's writing to these people. He's dealing with the whole concept of arrogance as it relates to material things. So the question that I've left here for you is, what are some specific attitudes and actions that demonstrate that we are applying this principle? My mind just went back to a passage we've already looked at when we were studying 1 Timothy, because there's no question that here he's talking now probably to believers when he says, instruct those who are rich in the present age not to be arrogant. See, that was the issue that he was dealing with, that James was dealing with, arrogance. Instruct them not to be arrogant or to set their hope on the uncertainty of wealth. In other words, putting all their focus there and leaving God out. Their focus should be on God, who richly provides us with all things to enjoy. God's not against us. God provides these things for us, but that cannot be the focus. It's the byproduct of putting God first. And so Timothy says, instruct them to what? Here are the practical suggestions that are the opposite of what these people were doing that James was addressing. Instruct them to do good with what they have, to be rich in good works, to be generous with what God has given, and the potential that he's given to accumulate, willing to share, and then storing up. And this, Jesus addressed this in the Sermon on the Mount. Storing up for yourselves a good foundation for the age to come. Storing up treasures in heaven, so that they may take hold of life that is real. In essence, Paul was saying to Timothy, there are people who think that life is real when we accumulate here. But he's saying that is not real in the sense that it will all disappear. And so he's addressing some very practical suggestions here in relationship to what James was addressing as well as he wrote this letter.